Hi everyone, welcome to our video this week. I didn't study in high school. This is a great video for anyone to watch who's wondering about how to transfer their high school study skills to college and how things are a little different oftentimes in college and just how to really figure all that out. So let's get started. There are a lot of big differences between college and high school, but the three that I want to focus on today are that classes are way bigger. So this can just mean it's easy to get lost in the sauce, sit in the back, not really focus. It's really that's a common thing. So think about that. Think about how you can kind of get yourself into a headspace of, this matters and I need to sit where I can see the board and where I can hear the professor. And if I have a question, the professor will see me raise my hand. So making sure that you are able to kind of sit front and center wherever it's easiest for you to see the projector or the board and hear the professor. Another big difference is that classes are not always mandatory. So it's actually really easy to just decide that you don't want to go one day. And this is also a trap that folks fall into a lot because once you stop going to class, it's really easy to get into the habit of not going to class. So, one of the things we really want to encourage students to do as advisors and success coaches is that you should always go to class unless you're really sick, in which case you shouldn't go because you need to rest and try not to pass illness to another person. But if you have the capability to go to class, you need to go to class. It's going to help you so much. And then the third thing, and this is a big thing when it comes to studying, is that classes move so fast through that material. You'll often find that in 15 weeks of one college semester, you get through all of the material you learned in a whole year in high school. So you're condensing it so much. Like it's going more than twice as fast as the amount of material would go in high school. So this is what we're really going to focus on today for most of this video, just talking about kind of how to handle this and how to get into good habits that work for you. So before class, now take a minute to think about what you actually do before class. Think about your hardest class. Maybe it's chem or bio, physics, math, computer programming, whatever it is for you. Think about what the expectations on you are before class. Are there reading assignments? Is there pre-work? A reading quiz? And what do you actually do before class? Do you do all that stuff? Do you do more than that? Okay, let's talk about maybe what we should be thinking about doing before class. Oftentimes there's pre-work, modules, slides, textbook reading, required videos, etc. So in high school, this isn't usually something that folks come across. So I want you to think about why that might be the case in college. Okay, I'm going to tell you the reason. The reason is so that you can follow along properly during class and not feel like things are moving at the speed of light. You've taken in a lot of that material already. You've kind of taught it to yourself a little bit. So when you get to class, you're just following along and you're thinking, yeah, I know this. I understand this. I read this. I watched this. I answered some questions about this. I engaged with this material already. This is not brand new to me. So I don't feel like my head is spinning and that I need to press pause on this live class, which you obviously can't do. So then, homework. Every class has homework. There are things you need to turn in before class for a grade. Sometimes it doesn't happen directly before class, but usually sometime between classes, homework needs to be turned in. And so it's important to make sure that you do this. Now, if you're finding it easy to miss assignments and you're often turning them in late, I would recommend creating some kind of assignment tracker spreadsheet for yourself to make sure that you understand you know, when everything's due, maybe even color coding it bright red if something is coming up. So you're just being hit in the face with it. And it's really obvious that you have to do it. Maybe even putting some reminders into your phone that you need to get stuff done. Then I want you to think about this learning objectives. You've probably seen these at least somewhere before. So, learning objectives we'll often see on slides, we'll often see them in textbooks, we'll often see them at the beginning of videos, maybe in modules. They're everywhere, but we often don't pay attention to them. It's one of those things where in high school, if you had a textbook reading, you might have skimmed over it because it just like didn't seem like it was that necessary and you were trying to get to the important stuff. In fact, the learning objectives are going to guide your whole experience of learning something. So if you see them somewhere, you need to write them down. Try to figure them out before you get to class. As a bonus, if you're in a problem-based class or, maybe even a content-based class, because biology, you could do this too, try some practice problems. You may have no idea how to solve them. That's actually okay. It's still good for your brain to try. And this is because when we try something, we start going down a neural pathway and creating a neural pathway. Now, we might have to backtrack and go in a different direction at some point if we're not doing this correctly. But you know what? It's going to stick better. That neural pathway that you do create that ends up getting you to the right answer is going to stick better if you attempted to do it without going to class and having somebody explain to you how to do it. So you can kind of prime your brain for the correct ways to do problems if you try them. You'll also probably become a more creative person, which is really useful when you're a problem solver and you're in any kind of problem solving field, as you're thinking of different ways to approach how to solve a problem. And that is a very useful skill. So now let's talk about what happens during class. You need to pay attention. So this is one of the reasons why we suggest that you sit up front, kind of in the middle where you can see the board really well, you can hear really well. You're able to pay attention so much better. So take notes by hand if you possibly can. This can be on paper or it can be on a tablet with a pencil, like a digital pencil. In very few cases, you might need to type notes, but you shouldn't feel like you need to get down every word. Now, the reason for this is that you paid attention to the pre-work and you took notes on that. So if you're in a content-based class, perhaps you even made a set of flashcards already when you were doing pre-work. If you came to our note-taking workshop or you watched our note-taking workshop video, which I'll link in the description box here, you'll know that flashcards are one of the best and most useful ways that you can take notes as a college student. But yeah, maybe your pre-work was a module, maybe it was a video, but you took notes there. You can pause a video. You can just take as many notes as you want during a module. So you've got stuff organized in your head already. So you're not freaking out and thinking you need to write down every single word the professor says. Another thing you can do is ask. If you had questions or things confused you during pre-work, whether you were reading, you were watching, you're doing a module, whatever it was, write them down. You know, if you're confused about something, this is a great opportunity to get unconfused. So pay attention to the lecture, see if those questions get answered. If they don't get answered, as the professor is kind of finishing covering that topic, you can raise your hand during class and ask. Now, sitting front and center will make that professor actually see you when you raise your hand. Sitting front and center is also going to help you pay better attention, be less likely to check your phone because you're in the professor's line of sight. You're creating this false sense of a close relationship between you and the professor if you're within the line of sight of them. Whereas if you're sitting in the back, maybe you're taking a nap, you're looking at your phone, you're playing games on your computer, that professor doesn't even notice you. And you know that that professor doesn't notice you. But if you're front and center, you're in their line of sight. They care about you. They actually do. They care what they see from students in their class. Now, one more thing here, examples. Examples are really important. Like examples of why something happens or examples of how to solve a different type of problem and why we might need to solve that problem. Whatever it is, write that down because oftentimes professors build on these examples for exam questions. They're not going to ask you, what's the definition of mitosis on a test? They're going to show you an example of mitosis in action and ask you a question about that scenario. And so if they give you an example of this in action in the class, you best pay attention to that because that's something that you might need to understand when it might come up on the test. Okay, now after class. After class is also really a very useful time to kind of start consolidating your knowledge. So learning objectives. There are learning objectives in almost every class. Whether or not the professor defines them, they exist. There was something you were supposed to learn in that class. So if you're given learning objectives or just one, Try and answer each one. Like go back to the slide where the learning objective or learning objectives were, and try to answer them all without looking at your notes or your book or anything, slides, you know what I mean. Just use your brain and see how much you retained from the pre-work and the lecture. Then go through your notes, your slides, your book, your module, whatever, and correct them. Now, if you don't get learning objectives, try to summarize class in 3 sentences. Try to write down what you were supposed to get out of that class. How is it tied to the big picture, what you just learned today? This is really good for your general understanding of the importance of each individual class, but also as it relates to the whole subject. Now, if you were the professor, how would you be presenting this material on the exam? Think about this and study in this way. You know, if you've already taken an exam, you kind of might know how they're presenting the material. So you can kind of try and formulate your own questions based on the exams you've seen. So again, if you've taken an exam, you're going to know what kinds of things you were asked to do. And think about an exam. An exam is an action item. You are asked to do things, whether that's solving problems, answering questions, filling in short answer questions, whatever it is, you're asked to do something. So in order to be ready for your next exam, you need to know what you're going to have to do, and you're going to have to practice doing that thing. So think about how you can guide your studying in the same way. I use this metaphor all the time in workshops, videos, and with students. But if you think about driving, when you get ready to take a driving test, whether or not you've taken a driving test, you probably know this, you actually have to practice doing the driving, because that's what you're going to be asked to do when you get in the car with the examiner. Drive a car properly without crashing it, following all the rules of the road, doing certain maneuvers. Those are the action items that you're going to do on your driving test. And so while you're preparing for your driving test, you practice doing those things. You create the neural pathways so that when you get behind the wheel with that examiner, you know what to do. Sometimes you still have to think through them. They're still kind of in your working memory, but you've practiced them enough that you know what to do. So you need to do the same thing when you're studying for a class in college. So let's talk about how this works. Okay, so one big difference between college and high school is the way that the tests look. In college, and I've talked about this before too, if you've seen some of our other videos or come to our other workshops, you'll probably know about Bloom's taxonomy, which has kind of knowledge and comprehension and understanding as the bottom two spots on that pyramid. So in high school, you're just asked to know stuff, comprehend it, maybe spit it back out. You'll see things like match the term to the definition or a short answer of how does something work. Now in college, we're moving up one rung on that pyramid to application. So application, basically on a biology or content-based test, is going to ask you to take what you were taught in class and apply it to a new situation. Now, I was getting at this earlier, talking about mitosis, which was just a random topic from biology, but something most people here have to cover in a biology class at some point if they take one. And again, you're not just going to be asked to match a term to a definition. They're going to say, here's a situation in which mitosis is involved. They might not even tell you mitosis is involved, but they're going to ask you some questions about the situation. And you're going to have to know what happens based on your knowledge that they taught you in class. And this situation may be something you've never encountered before, but you still have to know how to apply that knowledge to it. And so chemistry, physics, math, these are problem-based classes. They're usually going to ask you on tests to solve problems. And they're often problems you've never seen before. Okay, so how are we going to actually find some study methods here? Now, for content-based classes like biology or other classes, psychology, maybe that you're in, social science classes, or just anything where you have to memorize a bunch of stuff. Let's talk about how to memorize a bunch of stuff. How do you memorize? A lot of students just say they memorize by reading their notes. And that is really good if you're taking a test where you're asked to match a term to a definition. But like I just said like 4 times, you're not going to actually see that on tests at UMBC in STEM. So that's just called basically recognition. And so if you are good at recognition, reading your notes back, you'll probably be good at matching terms to definitions. But that's not what you're being asked to do. You're being asked to hold a bunch of stuff in your long-term or working memory, ideally your long-term memory, and apply that to new situations. So reading back your notes is not going to work. Flashcards is what's going to work. So you can use real flashcards. Those exist still. I know it's shocking. But most people don't use them because they cost money and you have to carry them around. So most students prefer digital tools like Anki or Quizlet. I talk about these tools all the time, and these two sites are linked in the description box. So add to your flashcard deck after your pre-work, and then add again after your lecture, putting in any information that you think you need to memorize. And you can memorize a lot of stuff if you use flashcards. So after you make the flashcards, you're going to need to spend time reviewing the flashcards as often as possible. And I don't mean like every hour you need to review the flashcards. I mean like 10 to 20 minutes every day, because that way, if you do something every day or even every other day, you're spacing out those practice sessions. You're sleeping in between those practice sessions so that you can encode that material properly. Yeah, those like 10 to 20 minutes a day for your content-based course or courses goes a long way by the time the exam rolls around, especially if you use something like Anki, which is free on internet browsers, not always free on the phone. So make sure that you know what you're getting into and maybe just download it on your laptop. But Anki is a spaced learning platform. So they actually ask you how well you know something. And if you know it really well, they're not going to show it to you as often. They're going to spend more time with you with the material that you need to review more, which is really good. Now let's talk about practicing applications. A lot of students these days in 2025 use ChatGPT or other AI services to practice applications. So we don't recommend this, and I'm going to tell you why. You actually have access to a textbook for most classes that have actual example problems. And these are much better practice for tests that your professor who has chosen this textbook is setting. So the magic of AI pulling stuff from every corner of the internet is super cool when you think about it. But when it comes to getting down to business for studying for a test, you probably want to use the material that already exists that's definitely more specific to the class that you're taking. So let's say you're in Bio 141 or 142 and you're using the Mastering Biology textbook. At the end of every chapter, you're going to see something that looks like this. So in chapter 13, it says this chapter 13 review. And then underneath that, we have test your knowledge, test your understanding, test your problem solving skills, and putting it all together, case study. Now, the check your knowledge and understanding sections, or test your knowledge and understanding sections, these are fantastic. These are kind of the bottom two levels of that Bloom's taxonomy pyramid. So you actually do need to know and understand the material before you can apply that material. So I would actually start out with the test your knowledge, test your understanding sections. But then when we get to test your problem solving skills, we're getting that application based stuff here. These problems where, like, they're giving you an example that you've probably never seen before. They're going to explain what they need to, and then they're going to say, here's the hypothesis, design an experimental study. They're going to ask you a question about what you learned in the chapter applied to a new situation here. So this is really useful when it comes to practicing applying your knowledge. Now, this is not what you're going to see specifically on your exams, but it's you're learning to practice applying the material in a way that's going to make it easier for you to do that on exams. So then if you go one more down, so back here we had putting it all together case study. So that's what it looks like. It's going to be more like another situation here where there's an actual case study that has a bunch of questions, and they're going to ask you a bunch of questions about the same case study. So here's the case study for chapter 13, for instance, and then here are some of the questions. So you can see here there are some multiple choice questions. This is really helpful for practicing for your exams because your exams are multiple choice. But then they're going to ask you to like draw stuff here in question 12. And then in question 13, they're going to tell you a new thing that is kind of integrated into this case study. And then they're going to ask you a question based on that new thing. And this is all the kind of stuff that you are going to need to practice when it comes to tests that ask you to apply your knowledge. Okay, let's move on to problem-based courses like chem, math, physics. What kinds of things do you need to do for the test? Solve problems. They're actually going to present you with a bunch of problems on the test, and you need to be able to do them. And that is it. That's the task. We need to figure out how to practice that task. So, in order to do that, you need to practice as much as you need to practice. Some students may find that the homework problems and the problems they go over in class is plenty. They totally understand how to do that type of problem when it comes to a test. Their brains have no trouble applying those equations and that information to a completely new situation. But this is a very small subset of students. Most students find that to get from where they are sitting as students who go to class and do the homework is not actually where they want to be in terms of what, how much they need to know to get the grade they want on a test. So we say point A to point B, there's a gap. How are you bridging that gap? Most classes have a place for you to practice that's given by the professors. So let's talk about Chem 102 quickly. Chem 102 is using Macmillan right now. There's a textbook that you all have to read before class for a reading quiz. And at the end of every chapter, there are problems. There are summaries, there are terms, there's a bunch of stuff. If you keep scrolling down, you're going to find the problems here. And you're going to see here, these are kind of similar to the things that you're going to see on a test. This is asking you for whole numbers rather than multiple choice. It looks like a multiple choice question, but it's just asking you to do a bunch of things. But these are really amazing practice for just trying out what you did in class. And if you see that number 9 there, that's got the number is in blue. If you click on that number, it's going to take you to the answer key. So you can check to see if you got that problem right. So when you're doing these problems, if you're not quite certain that you're doing them correctly, I would definitely recommend doing the ones with the blue hyperlinked answers first. It's usually every other problem. Now, once you're done with those, if you still need to practice more, you can go back and do the ones you didn't do. But the answers aren't there, so if you're not super confident on them, you're going to have to go ask somebody if you did it right. Now, Math 151, this is, there are multiple sections of Math 151 every semester, so yours might not look like this, but oftentimes there will be a page in Blackboard somewhere that has something like this, suggested textbook problems. If you're looking for more practice, this is an amazing place to start. These are suggested homework problems from the textbook. Each section by section, you are getting a bunch of problems you can try. Again, some have answers and some don't. That's okay. Do the ones with the answers first and then go back and do more practice if you need to. But this is an amazing way to just keep practicing that material that you learned in class to make sure that you're really comfortable with it when it comes up on an exam. Perhaps word it a little differently. You've tried so many practice problems, you've just completely annihilated these textbooks to get every last drop of practice out of them. You're going to be ready for that test. Now, physics, same kind of thing. You're going to see a lot of this stuff in the textbooks as well. Kind of somewhere at the end of the chapter, it might be at the end of every section, there are always practice questions in the Physics 121, 122 textbook. Now, if you want to practice, this is a great way to do that. Although in Physics 121 and 122, you often get a lot of back exams. So if you actually just want to practice by using last semester's tests or tests from 2 semesters ago, or even sometimes you can rip through 5 back practice exams for physics if you want. They're usually available for you. But if you want to use the textbook, there are often places in the textbook where you can practice as well. So the bottom line here is that you are responsible for your learning. And if you don't feel as comfortable with the material as you want to be before an exam, you are the only person who can get yourself there. You're responsible for that. So you need to make sure that you can get to this point, and if you don't know how, you have to figure out how. So think about the resources you need to use. Perhaps these practice problems and this method of practicing using a textbook is really helpful for you. But sometimes people need a little bit more supplemental help. So the Academic Success Center might have tutoring that can help you, whether that's appointment-based tutoring or drop-in tutoring. Your class might have SI Pass. If you're in chemistry, you can sign up for a chemistry tutorial center group. If you're in physics, you can visit the physics tutorial center. If you're still not sure what you need to be doing, you can visit your professor at their office hours. They're the ones who create the tests, so they're the ones who can point you to the best practice places, whether that's doing problems in a textbook or using back exams or using other resources. The professors will be able to tell you which resources are going to be best for you. So thanks for coming, and we will see you next time. Hopefully you found this video useful. Come back next week for another one.